The judge paused the audio and stared at my wife. Sarah was in the middle of a theatrical sob, her hands covering her face, playing the perfect traumatized victim. But the sound echoing from the tablet in the quiet Dallas courtroom was her own voice, laughing as she planned to send me to prison. She thought I was just a dumb mechanic. She thought I was a grease monkey who just turned wrenches and dragged dirt into her pristine suburban house. She had no idea that the $4,000 smart thermostat I installed in our hallway recorded every single evil word she said. But let me back up. Because this moment right here, this was the payoff. And the payoff means absolutely nothing without the 8 months of pure, unadulterated hell that came before it. You need context, because a guy like me does not sit back and let his wife walk him into a criminal charge without a story behind it. And brother, I have a story. My name is Jackson Reed. I am 34 years old, and I live in Dallas, Texas. If you ask my wife what I do for a living, she will roll her eyes, sigh like she is carrying the weight of the world, and tell you, I am a glorified plumber. She loved saying that. Glorified plumber. It made her feel superior. It made her feel like she was high society, even though her version of high society was just a mid-tier country club and maxed out credit cards at Target. But I am not a plumber. I am a master HVAC technician and a smart home integrator. I deal with high-voltage electricity, complex freon pressures, and cloud-based climate control networks. I keep massive commercial buildings from melting in the 105-degree Texas summer heat. It is physical work. It is exhausting work. But it is honest. And more importantly, it requires a level of observation that most people completely lack. You cannot fix a massive commercial chiller unless you know exactly how to read the diagnostic logs. I learned that from Old Man Wallace. He was my first boss in the trades when I was 19 years old. Wallace was a tough, leather-skinned guy who smoked cheap cigars and could diagnose a broken compressor just by listening to it hum. Wallace used to sit on the tailgate of his work truck, wiping grease off his hands, and drop wisdom on me. He only gave me one piece of advice that ever really stuck. The system always tells the truth if you know how to listen. He meant the air conditioning systems. But as I got older, I realized it applied to absolutely everything. People have systems. Marriages have systems. Liars have systems. And if you pay attention to the data, the truth is always sitting right there in plain sight. I am a pretty simple guy. I drive a heavy-duty work van filled with tools. I drink cheap black coffee from the gas station. I do not care about designer labels or country club memberships. My only real dream in life was to save up enough capital to start my own independent commercial HVAC fleet. I wanted 5 white vans with my name painted on the side. I wanted to stop working 60-hour weeks for a massive corporate conglomerate and build something that belonged to me. And more than anything, I wanted to build it for my daughter, Lily. She is 6 years old. She has my eyes and a laugh that can fix any bad day. She is the only reason I stayed in my marriage as long as I did. Because my marriage to Sarah was a sinking ship. Sarah was 32. She was the kind of woman who cared more about what the neighbors thought of our lawn than what was actually happening inside our house. We met 6 years ago. I was called out to fix a massive rooftop unit at a suburban country club. Sarah was working the front reception desk. She was wearing a dress she could not afford, acting like she owned the place. I thought she was charming back then. I thought her ambition was a good thing. I ignored the red flags. I know how stupid that sounds now. But when you work with your hands all day, someone who smells like expensive perfume and pays attention to you can be blinding. The good times were brief. We had Lily. We bought a nice 4-bedroom house in Frisco, a wealthy suburb north of Dallas. I worked double shifts of overtime to afford the mortgage. But the cracks started showing as soon as the ink on the deed dried. Sarah became obsessed with optics. She started taking Lily to expensive mommy and me yoga classes just to network with the wives of doctors and lawyers. She started hiding credit card bills. She started making little passive-aggressive comments about my work boots being left by the door. The seed of her destruction was planted on a Tuesday evening in October. I had brought home a brand new state-of-the-art smart HVAC system from the warehouse. It was a $4,000 unit that my company let me buy at wholesale. It had a sleek black touchscreen thermostat panel for the central hallway. I spent 4 hours crawling around in the attic installing the new control boards. When I came down, covered in fiberglass insulation and sweat, Sarah was sitting on the couch drinking a glass of wine. I showed her the new touchscreen on the wall. I explained how it worked. I casually mentioned that it featured acoustic anomaly diagnostics. "What does that mean?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "It means the thermostat has built-in microphones," I explained. "It records ambient audio in the house and sends it to the cloud to listen for compressor failures or duct rattling. It is a predictive maintenance feature." Sarah rolled her eyes. She took a sip of her wine. "Blue-collar nerd stuff," she muttered. "Whatever. Just don't track dirt on my rug." She completely dismissed it. She ignored the warning, and that sleek black panel on the wall just sat there, quietly listening to every single thing that happened in our house for the next 8 months. The real fracture happened just after Christmas. I was looking for a spare battery for my drill in Sarah's home office desk. I opened the bottom drawer and found a stack of legal documents. It was a retainer agreement for a law firm. The name at the top of the letterhead was Greg Vance, attorney at law. The retainer was for $15,000. My stomach dropped. I immediately checked our joint savings account on my phone. The balance was almost zero. I confronted her when she got home from getting her nails done. I was holding the paperwork. I asked her why she emptied our life savings to pay a lawyer I had never heard of. She did not panic. She did not cry. She just looked at me with absolute chilling contempt. She told me she was moving the money into a high-yield trust for Lily. She told me I would not understand the financial nuances. She completely gaslit me to my face. But I knew. You don't pay a family law attorney 15 grand to open a savings account. You pay them to plan a war. She was preparing to blindside me with a divorce. She wanted the expensive house. She wanted full custody for the child support checks. And she wanted to completely erase me. If you are listening to this, do me a favor. Hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you are listening from. I read every single one. All right, back to the story. Because the escalation is about to get completely out of control. Sarah realized I was onto her, and instead of backing down, she decided to make my life so miserable I would just pack my bags and leave the house voluntarily. The escalation started with disrespect. Beat number 1. We were hosting a neighborhood barbecue for the 4th of July. I had been smoking a brisket for 12 hours. My hands were stained with charcoal and barbecue rub. I was standing near the grill talking to a neighbor who worked in finance. He asked me what my thoughts were on the rising cost of commercial real estate. Before I could answer, Sarah walked up, handed the neighbor a beer, and laughed loudly. "Oh, don't ask Jackson about real estate," she said, her voice carrying over the music. "He is just a glorified plumber. He just fixes the vents. Ask him about unclogging a toilet." The neighbor looked incredibly uncomfortable. The group went silent. Sarah just smiled, took a sip of her margarita, and walked away. I stood there, holding a pair of tongs, feeling my face burn. A glorified plumber, in front of my own neighbors, in my own backyard. Beat 2 was the control phase. I tried to use our joint credit card to buy a tank of gas for my personal truck. It was declined. I called the bank standing at the pump. The bank teller informed me that Sarah had removed my name as an authorized user from all of our shared credit accounts. She had legally locked me out of our own money. I called her. She answered cheerfully. "You need to learn how to budget, Jackson," she said sweetly over the phone. "I cannot have you blowing our money on stupid tools and truck parts. I am managing the finances from now on. My own paycheck was deposited into that account. She was treating me like a teenager on an allowance. Beat 3 was the replacement. And this is where the dark humor really kicked in, because you cannot write a villain this pathetic. I got off work early on a Tuesday. A massive commercial job finished ahead of schedule, so I drove home to eat lunch and surprise Lily. I walked through the front door. The house was quiet, but sitting in my expensive leather recliner in the living room was a man I had never seen before. He was wearing a custom suit without a tie. He had an aggressively orange spray tan and teeth that looked like they glowed in the dark. He was drinking one of my expensive craft beers. And worst of all, he was wearing my favorite pair of memory foam house slippers. I dropped my keys on the counter. The sound made him jump. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. Sarah walked out of the kitchen. She froze. Then she immediately forced a fake, professional smile. "Jackson," she said smoothly. "This is Greg. He is a financial advisor. We were just discussing Lily's college fund." Greg stood up. He extended a hand that smelled like cheap cologne. "Nice to meet you, bud," he said. I looked at his hand. I looked at my slippers on his feet. Greg, the lawyer from the retainer agreement. The guy whose legal advice turned out to be significantly worse than his terrible golf swing. He was not just her lawyer, he was her new boyfriend. I did not shake his hand. I just pointed at his feet. "Take my slippers off, Greg," I said calmly. He laughed nervously, kicked the slippers off, and scrambled out the front door a minute later. His spray tan literally left an orange smudge on the headrest of my leather recliner. It was disgusting. Beat 4 was the public humiliation. It was a Saturday afternoon. Lily had a ballet recital at the local community auditorium. I had been working an emergency call all morning, fixing an AC unit at a local restaurant that went down during the lunch rush. I drove straight to the auditorium. I was wearing my work uniform. I was tired, and yes, I was sweating. It was Dallas in the summer. I walked into the dark auditorium and spotted Sarah sitting in the third row. There was an empty seat next to her. I walked down the aisle and started to sit down. Sarah stood up. She physically blocked the seat. "You are not sitting here," she hissed loudly. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, conscious of the other parents turning to look at us. "It's my daughter's recital." "You smell like a bar, Jackson," she yelled. Her voice echoed over the classical music playing from the stage. "You are disgusting. Take your dirty boots and get out of my sight." I had not had a single drop of alcohol. I smelled like Freon and sweat. But she wanted an audience. She wanted the other wealthy mothers to see her as the long-suffering wife dealing with an alcoholic blue-collar loser. I saw a mother 2 rows back whisper something to her husband, looking at me with pure pity. I did not want to ruin Lily's recital. I turned around, walked to the very back of the auditorium, and stood leaning against the wall in the shadows just to watch my little girl dance. Beat 5 was the spatial violation. A week later, a massive summer thunderstorm rolled through Dallas. The sky turned purple, and the rain was coming down in absolute sheets. I pulled my work van into our driveway. I sat in the cab for a second, waiting for the rain to let up. That is when I saw them. Sitting in the middle of the flooded concrete driveway were all my personal belongings, my expensive power tools, my off-duty clothes, my winter coats, and sitting right in the center of a massive puddle was my grandfather's wooden tool chest. She had thrown my entire life out into the rain. I got out of the van. The cold rain soaked through my uniform instantly. I picked up my heavy steel-toed boots. They were filled to the brim with dirty rainwater. I actually laughed. I stood in the pouring rain, holding my ruined boots, and chuckled. They actually needed a wash anyway. They smelled terrible. I packed my wet tools into the back of my van. I did not even try to go inside the house. I slept in the back of the van that night, wrapped in a moving blanket, listening to the rain hammer against the metal roof. Beat 6 was the ally attack. The next morning, my phone rang. The caller ID said, "Patricia, my mother-in-law." Patricia was a terrifying woman who smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day and sounded exactly like a discount mafia boss. I answered the phone. "Listen to me very carefully, you deadbeat," Patricia rasped into the receiver. "Sarah is done with you. You are going to sign the house over to her. You are going to give her full custody of Lily. Done with you." I sat in the driver's seat of my van, drinking lukewarm coffee. "And why would I do that, Patricia?" "Because if you fight her," she sneered, "I will hire a private investigator to rip through your life. We will find every mistake you ever made. We will ruin whatever reputation you have left in this town. No judge is going to believe a grease monkey over a crying mother." She hung up. They were so incredibly arrogant. They thought because I worked with my hands, I did not have a brain. They thought they could bully me into giving up my daughter. But beat 7. Beat 7 was the absolute breaking point, the institutional threat. It was a Tuesday night. I was at the house. I had demanded to see Lily. Sarah had sent Lily to a friend's house for a sleepover specifically so I could not see her. We were standing in the kitchen. I was staying perfectly calm, telling her she could not keep my daughter from me. Sarah smiled. It was a wicked, terrifying smile. "Watch me," she whispered. She picked up her cell phone. She dialed 911. She put the phone on speaker. The dispatcher answered. "Help me," Sarah screamed. It was immediate. The transition from a calm, evil smile to sheer hysterical panic was Oscar-worthy. "Please, my husband is attacking me. He is throwing things. He has been drinking." I froze. I stared at her in absolute disbelief. She grabbed a heavy ceramic coffee mug off the counter and smashed it into the stainless steel refrigerator. It shattered into 100 pieces across the kitchen floor. "He is going to kill me," she wailed into the phone. "Please hurry." She hung up. She looked at me. The panic instantly vanished from her face. She reached up with her fingernails and dragged them violently down her own cheek, leaving 3 deep, bleeding scratches. She grabbed the collar of her own blouse and ripped it downward, popping the buttons off. I took 2 steps back. My hands went up in the air instinctively. "You're insane," I breathed. "No judge is going to believe you, Jackson," she said quietly, her chest heaving as she prepared to play the victim. "He belongs in jail. He's a monster." 10 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the front windows of the house. 3 Dallas police officers burst through the front door. One of them was Detective Ramirez. I had fixed his home AC unit 2 years ago. He was a good, honest guy. But when he walked into that kitchen, protocol took over. Sarah was huddled in the corner, sobbing hysterically. Her face was bleeding. Her shirt was torn. The kitchen floor was covered in broken ceramics. And there I was, the big, muscular guy in heavy boots standing in the middle of the room. "Jackson," Ramirez said, his hand resting on his duty belt. "Put your hands behind your back." I didn't fight. I knew exactly how the system worked. If I yelled, if I argued, it would just give her more ammunition. I turned around. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around my wrists. The sound was deafening. As Ramirez walked me toward the front door, I looked over my shoulder. Sarah was peering out from behind another officer. The tears were streaming down her face, but her eyes were locked onto mine. And right before the front door closed, the corners of her mouth twitched upward into a triumphant, wicked smile. She thought she had won. I was placed in the back of the squad car. The plastic seat was hard and uncomfortable. The air conditioning in the police cruiser was blowing ice cold. I noticed the compressor was whining a little bit. It needed Freon. Ramirez got into the front seat. He looked at me in the rearview mirror. "I have to process you, Jackson," he said quietly. "She is filing for an emergency restraining order. You are going to be banned from the property. You cannot see your kid until a judge sorts this out." I nodded slowly. I stared out the window of the squad car at my house. My house. The one I paid for with double shifts and broken knuckles. I did not scream. I did not cry. I just went completely quiet. The rage inside me cooled down into something sharp and absolute. She thought she was untouchable. She thought her little performance in the kitchen was a masterpiece. She forgot about the sleek black touchscreen on the hallway wall. She forgot about the acoustic anomaly diagnostics. She forgot about the cloud. I took a slow, deep breath in the back of the police car. "Okay, Sarah," I whispered into the dark. "Okay. Before I tell you what happened next, if you have not hit subscribe yet, please do. It really does help. Now, let me tell you what she didn't see coming. I spent 14 hours in the Dallas County holding cell. It was exactly as miserable as you would expect. It smelled like bleach, old sweat, and bad decisions. I sat on a stainless steel bench, staring at the concrete wall, completely silent. The other guys in the holding cell were pacing, yelling at the guards, or complaining about their lawyers. I just sat there. I did not need a lawyer to figure out my next move. I just needed an internet connection. My buddy from the HVAC company, A massive guy named Dave bailed me out the next morning. Dave took one look at my bruised wrists from the handcuffs, shook his head, and handed me a large black coffee. "She got the emergency order, Jackson," Dave said as we walked out into the blinding Texas sun. "You cannot go within 500 feet of the house. You cannot contact her. She has Lily." I took a sip of the coffee. It burned my throat in the best way possible. "I know," I said. "Take me to a motel, Dave. And lend me your tablet." Dave dropped me off at a cheap motel right off the interstate. It cost $45 a night, and the air conditioning unit in the window sounded like a dying tractor. But it had a secure Wi-Fi connection, and that was the only thing I cared about. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress. I opened Dave's tablet. I navigated to the commercial integrator portal for the smart HVAC system. This was not the consumer app that Sarah had on her phone. She thought the system was just a fancy way to change the temperature from the couch. She had absolutely no idea that as a certified integrator, I had access to the deep diagnostic backend. I typed in my master credentials. The screen loaded. I clicked on our home address. The dashboard popped up, showing the freon pressures, the blower motor speeds, and right there at the bottom, a folder labeled Acoustic Anomaly Diagnostics. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened the folder. There were dozens of audio files. The system automatically recorded 30-second bursts whenever it detected a decibel spike. Shouting, dropping heavy objects, breaking glass. I scrolled down to Tuesday evening, the night she called the police. I put in a pair of cheap earbuds I bought from the motel vending machine. I pressed play on the first file. The audio was pristine. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the background. And then I heard Greg. Yes, Greg, the spray-tanned lawyer, the new boyfriend. He had been in the house an hour before the police arrived. "Listen to me, Sarah." Greg's voice came through the earbuds, sounding incredibly arrogant. "You have to make it look real. When you call 911, you have to sound absolutely terrified." I paused the track. My hands were shaking. I took a deep breath, steadied my fingers, and pressed play again. "I can do terrified," Sarah replied. Her voice was totally calm, completely calculated. "I will just break that ugly mug his mother gave us." "Make sure you scratch hard enough to draw blood, babe," Greg instructed. "The cops need to see physical marks. It guarantees the emergency order. Once he is out of the house, I will move my stuff in on Friday." I sat in that cheap motel room and listened to a lawyer coach my wife on how to commit felony fraud. But the best part, the absolute crown jewel of the recordings, was the next file. Greg had left. Sarah was alone in the kitchen. The microphone picked up her pacing across the hardwood floor, and then she started practicing her fake crying. She let out this high-pitched, warbling wail. She stopped, cleared her throat, and tried again. It was the most bizarre, pathetic thing I had ever heard. She sounded less like a traumatized victim and more like a dying hyena. She practiced screaming my name. She practiced hyperventilating. It was a one-woman theater production of pure evil. I downloaded every single audio file to a secure cloud drive. I made 3 separate backups. Then, I picked up my phone and called the one person who could help me turn this data into a weapon: Detective Ramirez. Ramirez met me at a local diner on his lunch break. He was off the clock, wearing civilian clothes, but he still had that cop posture. He slid into the booth across from me and ordered a black coffee. "Jackson, you should not be calling me," Ramirez said, keeping his voice low. "I arrested you. If your wife's lawyer finds out we are talking, I could lose my badge. I just need 5 minutes, Ramirez." I slid the tablet across the sticky table. I handed him the earbuds. "Press play." Ramirez looked at me skeptically. He put the earbuds in. He tapped the screen. I watched his face. I watched the exact moment the realization hit him. Ramirez was a good cop. He took pride in protecting people. When he heard Greg coaching Sarah on how to fake the injuries, his jaw clenched so hard I thought he was going to crack a tooth. When he heard Sarah practicing her hyena cries, his face flushed bright red. He realized he had been played. He realized Sarah had used his badge, his authority, and his gun to execute a real estate theft. Ramirez pulled the earbuds out. He threw them onto the table. "That is Greg Vance on the recording?" Ramirez asked, his voice vibrating with anger. "The attorney?" "Yes," I said. Ramirez rubbed his temples. "Okay. Listen to me very carefully, Jackson. Because you acquired this audio through a home diagnostic system that you own, and because she had no reasonable expectation of privacy in a shared kitchen, this is entirely admissible. But you cannot just walk into family court and play it from a tablet." "Why not?" I asked. "Because Greg is a lawyer," Ramirez growled. "He will object to the chain of custody. He will claim the audio is manipulated. You need someone who knows how to legally subpoena the cloud servers directly from the HVAC manufacturer, so the chain of evidence is bulletproof." Ramirez grabbed a napkin. He pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote down a name and a phone number. "Call this guy," Ramirez said. "His name is Marcus. He is a bulldog. He hates dirty lawyers more than anything in the world. Tell him I sent you." I took the napkin. "Thank you, Ramirez." Ramirez slid out of the booth. "Do not thank me yet, Jackson. Just bury them." I called Marcus that afternoon. Marcus was a short, bald guy who operated out of a cramped office downtown. He listened to the audio. He did not smile. He did not laugh at the hyena crying. He just nodded, pulled out a thick stack of legal forms, and went to work. We spent the next month setting the trap. I played the role of the defeated husband perfectly. I lived in a rented room. I showed up to the mandatory mediation sessions looking exhausted and broken. Sarah brought Greg to the mediation. Greg sat across the table wearing a custom suit, acting as her official legal counsel. He smirked at me the entire time. Greg offered me a terrible settlement. He said Sarah would keep the house, keep primary custody of Lily, and I would pay $2,000 a month in child support. In exchange, Sarah would agree not to pursue criminal assault charges. It was pure extortion. Marcus, sitting next to me, just looked at the paperwork, folded his hands, and said, "We will see you in court." Sarah laughed. She actually reached across the table and patted my hand. "You should take the deal, Jackson," she whispered, her eyes full of venom. "No judge is going to believe a grease monkey over a crying mother." I looked at her hand. I looked at Greg's spray tan. "I will take my chances," I said quietly. The reversal happened on a sweltering Tuesday morning in August. We were in the Dallas County Family Court, assigned to Judge Brenda Carter. Judge Carter had a reputation for being completely ruthless. She did not tolerate nonsense, and she was fiercely protective of victims of domestic violence. Sarah knew this. She dressed specifically for the occasion. She wore a modest, long-sleeved gray dress. She wore absolutely no makeup, ensuring the faint, healing scratches on her cheek were perfectly visible. She looked small, fragile, and terrified. Greg sat right beside her at the petitioner's table, looking incredibly serious and professional. I sat at the respondent's table with Marcus. I wore a clean suit. I kept my hands folded on the table. Judge Carter called the court to order. She looked down from the bench, adjusting her glasses. "We are here to rule on the permanent protective order and the final custody arrangement," Judge Carter said, her voice echoing in the large room. "Mr. Vance, you may call your client to the stand." Greg stood up, buttoned his expensive jacket, and guided Sarah to the witness stand. Sarah placed her hand on the Bible. She swore to tell the truth. For the next 30 minutes, she delivered the performance of a lifetime. She wept. She trembled. She told the judge how I had completely lost my mind that night in the kitchen. She claimed I smelled like alcohol. She claimed I threw the heavy ceramic mug at her head, missing her by inches and shattering against the refrigerator. She claimed I tackled her to the ground and scratched her face. She looked directly at the judge, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought I was going to die, Your Honor," Sarah sobbed, her voice breaking perfectly. "He belongs in jail. He is a monster." Judge Carter looked at Sarah with deep sympathy. The judge handed her a tissue from the bench. "Take your time, Mrs. Reed. You are safe here." Greg looked over his shoulder at me and smirked. He thought he had it in the bag. "No further questions for my brave client, Your Honor," Greg said smoothly, taking his seat. Judge Carter turned her sharp eyes on my lawyer. Mr. Marcus, do you have a cross-examination, or are we ready to proceed to sentencing? Marcus stood up slowly. He grabbed a manila folder from our table. I do have a few questions for Mrs. Reed, Your Honor, Marcus said calmly. Marcus walked up to the podium. He looked at Sarah. Mrs. Reed, you testified that you were completely alone in the house with your husband on the night of the incident. Is that correct? Yes, Sarah whispered, dabbing her eyes with the tissue. And you testified that your husband threw a ceramic mug at your head in a drunken rage. Is that correct? Yes. Marcus opened the folder. He pulled out a piece of paper. Mrs. Reed, are you familiar with the climate control system installed in your home? Sarah blinked. She looked confused. Greg frowned from his table. Objection, Your Honor, Greg called out. Relevance? We are here discussing a violent assault, not air conditioning. I am establishing a timeline of events based on the home's infrastructure, Your Honor, Marcus replied smoothly. It will be incredibly relevant in about 60 seconds. I will allow it, Judge Carter said. But get to the point, Counselor. Marcus looked back at Sarah. The system, Mrs. Reed. Are you familiar with it? It is just a thermostat, Sarah said dismissively. My husband installs them. He is just a mechanic. He is a certified smart home integrator, Marcus corrected gently. And that specific thermostat, which is registered to the central Wi-Fi network of your home, features a diagnostic recording function. It turns on automatically when it detects the sound of breaking glass. Sarah froze. The tissue in her hand dropped slightly. Greg sat up straight in his chair. His spray tan suddenly looked very pale. Your Honor, Marcus continued, turning to the judge. Last week we subpoenaed the manufacturer's cloud servers for the audio logs from the Frisco property. We received the authenticated, time-stamped files directly from the corporate database. I have a tablet here with the audio and printed transcripts for the court. Objection! Greg shouted, jumping to his feet. He was panicking. He cited a legal precedent that literally did not exist. Your Honor, this is an illegal wiretap. My client had an expectation of privacy. In her own kitchen, while shouting loudly enough to trigger a diagnostic sensor? Marcus countered. Texas is a one-party consent state, Your Honor, and Mr. Reed is the primary account holder of the system. The evidence is entirely lawful. Judge Carter looked at Greg. Overruled, Mr. Vance. Sit down. Let me hear the audio. Marcus approached the bench. He handed the tablet to the bailiff, who placed it in front of the judge. I direct the court's attention to file number 4, recorded at exactly 7:15 p.m., roughly 45 minutes before the police were dispatched. Judge Carter tapped the screen. The courtroom was dead silent. And then, the crystal-clear audio filled the room. Make sure you scratch hard enough to draw blood, babe. The cops need to see physical marks. It guarantees the emergency order. Once he is out of the house, I will move my stuff in on Friday. I can do terrified. I will just break that ugly mug his mother gave us. Judge Carter's head snapped up. She stared at Sarah. Greg physically pushed his chair back from the table. He looked like he was about to vomit. But Marcus was not done. Now, play file number 6, Your Honor. Time-stamped 5 minutes before the 911 call. Judge Carter tapped the screen again. The hyena crying started. Sarah's bizarre, pathetic wails echoed off the mahogany walls of the courtroom. The sound of her practicing her victim routine, stopping, clearing her throat, and trying again. I looked at Sarah on the witness stand. The color had completely drained from her face. She was staring at the tablet like it was a live rattlesnake. Her mouth was hanging open. The terrified victim routine was gone, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated panic of a cornered animal. Judge Carter hit the pause button. She slowly took off her reading glasses. She placed them carefully on her desk. The silence in the courtroom was so heavy you could feel it pressing against your chest. Judge Carter looked at Greg. Mr. Vance, was that your voice on the recording? Coaching this woman on how to fabricate a violent felony? Greg stammered. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. He looked at the exit doors. Judge Carter turned her gaze to Sarah. You sat in my courtroom, Judge Carter said, her voice dangerously quiet. You placed your hand on a Bible. You wept. You tried to use the absolute worst nightmare of real abuse victims as a weapon to steal a house and a child. Sarah started to shake. Real tears finally formed in her eyes. Your Honor, please, she whispered. He manipulated me. Greg told me to do it. I stood up from my table. I looked at the woman who had tried to throw my life into a wood chipper. I looked at her completely ruined expression. I delivered the line perfectly. The thermostat records ambient audio, Sarah. Sarah let out a choked sob and buried her face in her hands. Judge Carter slammed her gavel down so hard it echoed like a gunshot. Bailiff, Judge Carter barked. Lock the doors. Take Mrs. Reed into custody immediately for perjury, filing a false police report, and felony fraud. The bailiff stepped forward. He grabbed Sarah by the arm. She screamed, not a fake scream. A real, terrified shriek as the heavy metal handcuffs clicked around her wrists. And as for you, Mr. Vance, Judge Carter said, pointing a finger directly at Greg, I am sending this audio to the district attorney and the Texas State Bar Association. You are going to be disbarred, and you are going to be indicted for conspiracy to commit fraud. Do not leave the building. The emergency protective order against me was vacated instantly. Judge Carter granted me full, immediate legal and physical custody of Lily. I walked out of the courtroom into the blazing Dallas heat. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like hot asphalt and victory. The cascade of ruin hit Sarah and Greg with breathtaking speed. When you build a relationship entirely on greed and stolen property, the foundation crumbles the second the pressure is applied. Greg was disbarred within 3 months. The State Bar Association did not even hesitate. The audio of him explicitly coaching a witness to fabricate physical injuries was the easiest open and shut case they had seen in a decade. He was indicted on conspiracy charges. To save himself from a massive prison sentence, Greg immediately flipped on Sarah. He told the prosecutors that the entire fake assault was her idea, and he was just trying to help the woman he loved. Because of course he did. A rat will always abandon a sinking ship. Sarah was charged with multiple felonies. Because she had spent all of our joint savings paying Greg's initial retainer, she had absolutely no money left for a real defense attorney. She had to use a public defender. The Frisco house went into foreclosure. Sarah had stopped paying the mortgage while I was kicked out, assuming Greg would cover it. But Greg had frozen all his assets the second the criminal investigation started. I let the bank take the house. I did not want it. Every room in that place was poisoned by her ambition. The final contact I had with Sarah happened about a week before her sentencing hearing. I was at my new shop. I had rented a commercial garage on the outskirts of Dallas. I was organizing inventory when my cell phone rang. It was a number from the county detention center. I accepted the charges. Jackson, Sarah's voice came through the receiver. She sounded exhausted. Her voice was raspy. I did not say anything. I just listened. Please, Jackson, she begged. They are talking about 3 years in prison. The food is terrible. It is so hot in here. I cannot survive this. Please talk to the judge. Tell her Lily needs her mother. I leaned against my workbench. I looked out the open bay doors of my shop. Sarah, I said calmly, you threw my boots in the rain. You called me a grease monkey. You tried to put me in a concrete cell for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I was stupid. Please. It is 90 degrees in this cell and the air conditioning is broken. I smiled. I thought about old man Wallace. I thought about the system telling the truth. I kept my voice completely flat. Enjoy the new climate. I hung up the phone. I blocked the number. She was sentenced to 36 months in a state facility. It has been 2 years since that day. I am sitting in the office of my commercial garage right now. Through the glass window, I can see the parking lot. Sitting in the lot are 5 heavy-duty white vans. The side of each van has a blue logo painted on it. Reed Commercial Climate Control. I built the fleet. I own the business. I employ 6 guys who work hard, get paid well, and never have to take disrespect from anyone. I bought a nice piece of land out past the suburbs. It has a wraparound porch and a massive yard. Lily is 8 years old now. She is thriving. She has a golden retriever puppy that digs holes in the flower beds, and I do not care at all. The dirt just means we are actually living in the house. Old Man Wallace was right. The system always tells the truth if you know how to listen. Sarah thought the truth was whatever story she could scream the loudest. She thought the truth belonged to the people with the most expensive lawyers and the best acting skills. She forgot that the truth does not care about your spray tan. The truth does not care about your country club. The truth is just data. And if you have the patience to collect it, the discipline to hold it, and the timing to deploy it, the truth is the most destructive weapon on earth. I take a sip of my cheap black gas station coffee. I look at my boots by the door. They are covered in mud, and they are exactly where they belong. My life is quiet. My life is mine. And for the first time in years, I am completely free. Thanks for listening. More stories are on your screen right now. Click one. You won't regret it. See you in the next one.